You're listening to the My Simplified Life podcast, and this is episode number 188. Welcome to the My Simplified Life podcast, a place where you will learn that your past and even your present don't define your future. Regardless of what stage of life you're in, I want you to feel inspired and encouraged to pursue your dreams, simplify your life, and start taking action today. I'm your host, Michelle Glogovac, and I'm excited to share my stories and life lessons with you while taking you on my own journey. This is My Simplified Life. Hey friends, welcome back to another episode. I'm your host, Michelle Glogovac. Every now and again, I will get a message from someone who says, you need to have this person on your show. And today's guest is one of those people that I was asked to have on by my good friend, Helia. Genevieve Wheeler is the author of Adelaide. It came out in April, and it is a must-read. I devoured this book. It was so good. It follows Adelaide, who is an American living in London. She went to school over there, decided to get a job so she could stay. She falls in love, but the guy is a total douchebag. And so we follow Adelaide, who I find to be one of the kindest, sweetest human beings on the face of the planet. She is who I wish I could be more like because she is so kind and thoughtful. But as you continue reading, you find that she's too thoughtful. She's people-pleasing, and there's a reason behind so much of it. Genevieve touches on mental illness, mental health, and so much more. The book is not simply a rom-com, a woman's lit type of book. It goes much deeper than that, and it's also a very fun read. I loved it. I felt like I was right there in London, walking down cobblestone streets and enjoying tea in a garden. It's just, I can't rave more about it. But so I got to reach out to Genevieve, who is so amazingly kind and thoughtful, and she said absolutely she'd come on the show. So now I got to ask her all of the questions that I've wanted to ask, and then some. So you will learn more about Genevieve, things about the book Adelaide that are referring to Genevieve's life for real. So you get an inside peek into the goings-on behind the scenes part of this book and how real life played a part in Adelaide. Hi, Genevieve.
Hello, how are you?
I'm so good. How are you?
I'm good. Thank you.
I'm so excited to talk to you. You are the author of Adelaide, which so many people are talking about right now. Can you, for a moment, introduce yourself to everybody, please?
Of course. So my name is Genevieve Wheeler. I am the author of Adelaide, as you mentioned, which came out in April from St. Martin's Press. And that's kind of it. That's the big intro.
I love it though, but you're so much more. We all know that. It's more than you've written an amazing novel that I thoroughly enjoyed. I read it very quickly, and when I can read something quickly, then to me that's a really good book.
I mean, I take that as such a great sign. People sometimes, I think, get worried that if they don't take their time reading a book, an author will be like, oh, but I spent so much time reading it. But I think, or writing it rather. But I think if someone reads it quickly, that's just such a seal of approval and such a lovely thing to hear.
I think I just saw a meme the other day about something like that, where it takes an author like 1,000 hours to write a book. And then in one day, the reader reads it and it's like, what's next?
Yeah, exactly. But I mean, in the best way possible.
This was your debut novel, yes?
This was my debut novel. Yeah.
How did that all come about? I mean, and it's a hit. Everyone's talking about it. At least everyone in my world of Instagram and everything else, it's there.
That's so good to hear.
So what was that journey like? How did this all come about?
Yeah, so my journey to publication was an interesting one. I actually so I'd done some freelance writing. I'd always loved writing, always wanted to kind of write a book at some point, but didn't know what story I would tell. And in January of 2019, I wrote a freelance article for Vice about an Instagram influencer, and it got the attention of an editor. And she'd said, I wanted to commission a book around Instagram culture and kind of influencers in that world. And would you be interested in working up a proposal around that? So off of that, I found my agent, spent a year writing this proposal about a nonfiction proposal about Instagram culture, essentially, and it didn't end up selling. And so in March of 2020, I got on the phone with my agent and she said, right, do you have anything else up your sleeve? And I had a kind of crazy year and thought, I could take some aspects of that and some journal entries that I had and turn that into something. And that's how Adelaide was born.
I love it.
Yeah. Yeah. And again, it was March of 2020. So a week later, the world shut down and I don't have children. I wasn't working at a hospital. So I was really just given the gift of time as a result, which meant that I was able to just pour all of my free time into writing the book. And here we are.
And I love it. I've read some reviews and everybody loves that you touch on mental health in it. And I appreciate it as well. I have to say that throughout the book, I was like, Adelaide's the kindest person in the world. I wish I was more like Adelaide. Her gifts are so thoughtful. And then towards the end, I was like, oh shit, she was doing too much for everybody else, but I want to be like Adelaide.
Oh man, that's so funny. I think people have a couple of different reactions to the character of Adelaide, and I think some people are like, I just want to shake her and kind of shake some sense into her because the reader can see what's going on so much more clearly than she can in terms of kind of the relationship, which is the central focus of the book, and her relationship with Rory. But I think at the same time, like there are definitely books out there that touch on mental illness and on mental health, and this is far from the first one to do that. But I wanted to write a book that could show a character who was depressed without being depressing, so to speak. And I think that's where the kind of like the gift giving and the bubbliness and the acts of kindness all come into play. Because a lot of the times I think we see these depressed characters who are acting in very toxic ways, not just to themselves, but to others around them. Mm-hmm. And I wanted to write a character who kind of struck a different balance there. So I'm glad that resonated. I'm glad you wanted to be more like Adelaide. That's amazing.
I was like, these gifts she gives are so thoughtful. And I was like, well, she called ahead for this gift and she made sure that, they had dessert or whatever it was. I'm like, this is just, I never think, this is something I've been struggling with like lately. I'm going, you know what? I'm not doing enough for others, like in that sense. And so reading this, I was like, oh, yes, I want to be more like Adelaide, but I don't want to be I'm married, so I don't have to worry about the relationship nonsense where, I was like, get rid of him. He's such a jerk.
That's it.
Now, it all takes place in England. Tell me what goes on with you? What's your experience with England and knowing where everything is and what the locale is?
Yeah, so I am also based in London. I moved to London about 5 years ago. Took a brief intermission last year. I was living in Paris last year, but have spent most of my kind of later 20s, early 30s living in London. So I'm quite familiar with the setting and I am quite enamored with the setting. I've always loved London and it never gets old to me. Like I still walk down the street and I'm like, oh my goodness, it's just so charming and beautiful here. And so it was easy to kind of capture that like starry-eyed American living in London feeling that Adelaide has because I have it every day.
And what brought you to London? Like what was 5 years ago? You're just like, oh yeah, I'm just going to go to London. What's up?
Kind of. So I lived abroad when I was little. I lived in a town outside of London and I also lived in Paris. And then I studied abroad in London and in Paris again when I was in college. And so I think at that point it kind of solidified like, right, I want to be over here. This is what feels like home to me. And so I graduated from college and worked a couple years in New York and then decided to move to London to get my master's and ended up getting a job from there and have been here since.
So very Adelaide-like.
Very Adelaide-like indeed.
I love it. And I love the way you captured the scenery. I felt like I was there. Like the garden scene where, they go meet his family and then her new flat. I was like, oh, I can just picture it and I want to be there. I've been to London once and I was very lucky. It was sunny. So
oh, perfect.
It was beautiful. And yes, I was like, yeah, let's go back.
Yeah. You've got to come back. It's a lovely place.
How long did it take you to write Adelaide?
So the first draft I wrote from March until December, so 9 months, the same like a baby, basically.
Yeah.
And then I edited with my agent from January until about March. We went out on submission in April. And then I edited some more with my editor once we sold it from about June to September, I would say. So all in, it was about a year and a half. But that first initial draft was 9 months.
Which is really quick. I've interviewed authors who are like, yeah, I worked on it for a decade. And I'm going, oh man,
Yeah.
like it hurts.
Yeah. And I understand, like my second book took me a lot longer to write.
When does this come out? Do tell, do
Taken a
tell.
lot longer to write, I should say, because I'm still in the process of it. It'll come out in 2025, I think. And it's totally different from Adelaide. It's about two best friends. It's set in Paris. But I've had a very different experience writing that, whereas Adelaide really just kind of poured out of me, and it was quite easy to get the words down for the most part. And that's why I was able to do it in 9 months, I think.
Something I noticed about the way you write, because as I'm looking at my next book and, I've never done fiction. So what caught my eye in yours is that you don't use quotations. You italicize when someone's talking. And this is the first book I've ever seen in my life that does that. What is that about, like, for you? And it's another author that I interviewed who's a professor. I mentioned this to her after we were done recording, and I'm like, I didn't know that was something you could do.
Yeah, it's controversial for sure. But I'd read, right before I wrote Adelaide, I'd read a galley of a book called Stray by Stephanie Danler, who also wrote Sweet Bitter. And I can't remember if it was all dialogue or if it was just past tense dialogue, but she used italics for some dialogue in the book. And I really liked that. I felt like it just kind of, especially when she was doing it in the past tense, it just kind of like sat in with these memories that she was explaining and writing about so nicely. And in Adelaide's case, because it's third person, but you're kind of in her head for the most part, I liked the idea of putting the dialogue in there, but also interjecting it with her thoughts. I thought italics were the smoothest way to make that kind of flow. So that's why I opted out of using quotation marks. But
what did your editor say about that, though?
So that's how I wrote it from the start. And my agent liked it. My editor liked it. Like, I remember there was kind of one conversation when we were getting ready to go to production and have it set in the font and kind of formatted a certain way. And that meant that, text messages would be put in a different font than regular dialogue and so on and so forth. And that was the one thing I said I would really like to keep all of the dialogue in italics and not change that. And they were on board with it.
I love it. It's much easier coming from a perspective of like, well, where does the comma go? Inside the quote, outside the quote? Like,
right.
That seems so much harder. And I was like, oh, italics. Well, that makes it easy.
Yeah. And it's nice too, because again, you can use italics for thoughts, and then you can also use it for dialogue. And I think it just kind of makes it all work together in a way that it might not if you had quotation marks in there, at least for this particular story.
I love it. What has this experience been like for you once you did the book? Like, obviously you must have been excited when you were approached at first, and then things didn't work out and you're like, okay, that sucks, obviously. But then you write this novel, it's become a hit. What has this now experience been like?
It's interesting. It almost feels like a fever dream, because I think when I first sold the book, it was all potential, right? And so it was just this idea of a book that's going to come out, and there are no markers of what success looks like or anything, except that now it's a thing that's going to exist in the world. And then the week of launch was really surreal, because suddenly there were people who were reading the book and getting in touch with me, especially because it was a book of the month pick. So readers through book of the month got it earlier in April. So I was getting emails and messages from people who were reading the book and connecting with it in some way, or not connecting with it in some cases. And it's just, it's been really surreal and wonderful, but also just kind of hard to wrap your head around, because there's so much of me in this book. And so it's interesting to see people kind of interpret it in their own ways and make what they want to make, and draw their own conclusions about why certain characters are doing certain things and so on and so forth.
That makes sense. And then what's been the reaction with family and friends?
Oh, it's been lovely. It's been lovely. They've been so good. I was really nervous I was nervous for certain people to read it, because just in really basic ways, like there's sex in the book, and I was scared to have my parents read it, kind of thing.
That makes sense.
Nerve-wracking and uncomfortable. But no, everyone's been really lovely about it, which is great.
I know that for me, like, there are people who are so overly excited and sometimes it doesn't feel like it's real. I'm like, well, there's no book out yet. Like, it's there. And they're like, no, you're going to be in a bookstore and the library. That's what my kids are so excited about. but it doesn't feel like it's real. Like, when does it start to feel real?
I don't think it does, is the thing.
Oh, great.
I know. Well, it's also, in my case, I don't have a UK deal and I'm based in London.
Mm-hmm.
So when I go into a bookstore here, I don't see my book.
Oh.
So I think that kind of makes it a little bit, I think maybe that moment when you kind of serendipitously walk into a bookstore and see your book on a shelf and realize that you didn't put it there, someone else put it there. Like maybe that's the moment that it feels real. But for me, it never did. It still doesn't feel real, even having messages from readers. I mean, there have been readers who have gotten like the cover art tattooed on their body and have sent it to me, and it still feels wild and like out of this world, and it's hard to believe that it's actually happening.
Oh, that's absolutely crazy.
Yeah, in the best way.
Yeah. But also in like, wow, like I don't have any tattoos because I'm like, what is it that I want that's so permanent on me? So that's huge. Although I did love the tattoos that Adelaide had. Like they were small and recognizable, especially if you were a reader.
Yeah.
Those were adorable. I was like, oh, maybe a little peach.
A little peach, a little call me by your name peach. Yeah, Adelaide and I have all of the same tattoos. That is one thing that I gave her that I also
have. Okay, well now I can picture your body, which is weird, right? And I just said that out loud, so sorry.
I love it. I'm here for it.
What is it like to have the strangers just coming at you, though? Because like I came at you as a stranger, and I know friends have, and you're just so kind and responsive. And I don't know if maybe we just don't expect that from to us. You're a big time author. You are. You've found success. We've read the book. We love it. It's everywhere. And to have, an instant response it's exciting.
Yeah. I mean, I try to be really responsive when people get in touch, and it's not like I'm getting, hundreds of messages a day, in which case I think it might be a little bit more difficult to ensure that I'm responding to everybody and taking the time and being thoughtful. But I would say I tend to wake up in the morning and normally I'll have a few messages from someone in the US, because obviously I'm 5 hours ahead over here. And so I just take that time to just really try to be responsive and to connect with people who have connected with the book, and just to try to take it in as well, because it's such a gift that someone has read it and enjoyed it and reached out to me. Like that's such a lovely gesture. And I think it's reminded me that I can do that too with different authors, and they're likely to respond if they have the capacity to.
Right. I think that people forget that. Like you're a regular person. And, because I'll get asked, how'd you get so-and-so on your show? And even my friend, it's hell yeah. We have to say her name because she's going to be listening and all of her friends are listening. She told me when this airs, but she was like, oh my gosh, you have to have her on your show. And I was like, okay, I'll read the book. Let me see. And I went, yes, I would love to. And I go, yeah, she said, yes. She went, seriously? She said, yes. I'm like, yeah, you ask.
Yes, that's it.
Just ask.
That's it.
But it's so much fun because it's like a mood. You're like a celebrity, you've done something big that the world can see. And so it seems like for those of us who read the book, like you would be untouchable per se.
I think there's just this idea that like once you've published a book, that there's some divide between, like if your name is printed on the title of a book, then there's automatically a divide between you and the reader. And the truth is, especially with as many lines of communication as we have right now, like there is no real barrier there. I think it's important to remember that just because you've read someone's book doesn't mean you necessarily know their story or know all of the ins and outs of it, because I think it's easy to make assumptions about what you then know about a person that you've never met. But by and large, I think, yeah, it's such a lovely thing to hear from readers, and it's such a lovely thing to be able to reach out to an author that you love. And we can do that now. We have the capacity to.
When you bring up an interesting point about knowing an author, thinking you know them, because I truly did not even think that in most novels, there are nonfiction parts that authors are putting in their books.
Mm-hmm.
As I'm exploring fiction, I'm like, oh, I could pull from my life. I don't have to just create this story from scratch. And it's really been eye-opening to now read books a little differently, read the backstory, the biography of the author and go, oh, they pulled that from their life, not knowing. Right. like the tattoos, I wouldn't have known unless we were in person, and
Yeah.
I saw it, that was actually you. So I find it really fascinating that even though we're reading all of these novels, we're getting a part of the author, an inside that we might not
Yeah.
even recognize is part of them.
It's interesting too, because I think in some cases there are going to be pieces of an author in a book that you'll never know were theirs, and you'll never know were part of their story. And I think in other cases, people get very, I don't want to say presumptuous, but I think a little presumptuous. If like you have certain characteristics in common with your main character, people will assume that like the entire book is autobiographical. And I think it's just important to remember that you'll never really know the answer. And that's kind of exciting and freeing on both sides, I think, to know that like you can know that a person captured certain emotions in a way that really ring true for you, but you'll never know how true they are to that person.
Right. And I wonder if it's written differently when it is something that truly captures what we've experienced versus what we think it might, relate to emotional wise.
Yeah, I don't know, because I think some of my favorite novels are completely fictional, to my knowledge at least, and some are autobiographical. And again, it's you never really know where it stops and where it ends, and that's a lovely, lovely thing.
How did you, as you wrote Adelaide, I've been getting these tips of like write a scene and then put that away and then write another scene and then you can bring them all together. As you said, you went through like journal entries and whatnot. How did you map this all out? How you were going to put it together? How did that all work out? What was your process like?
So I really didn't do any mapping. I really just sat down and kind of wrote it chapter by chapter. I knew I wrote the epilogue after I'd written the first couple of chapters. So I knew early on the note on which I wanted everything to end. But other than that, it was pretty chronological. And I would pull from, if I got to, I had an idea of the story in my head, but I hadn't outlined anything. And so as I got to certain things that were closer to situations I'd experienced, I would look through my notes and see if I had any journal entries that connected to that so that I could pull those words and those feelings in. And I also have a tendency to kind of like write down in my notes app if I find that like it's a really beautiful day and the sun is hitting the street in a certain way, then I'll take a note and, write down what that looks like and feels like. And so I borrowed from those types of things when I was crafting the story. But
I love that. This is great. Yeah.
Yeah. But by and large, it was really just kind of sitting down and writing it all out.
It's so fascinating. I think hearing how different writers, what the process is. One gets up at like 6 a.m. and goes to her basement and writes everything and, doesn't come out until she hits so many words. But I love that you're getting inspiration when you're just walking down the street and you're like, oh, I better capture this moment so I can use it. It sounds so beautiful. And as I'm looking at you and the lights hitting the back of your head, I'm like, oh, it's like one of those moments. This is something you should write down.
Here we go. We're in it. We're in it now.
I love it. And so what did you do before you became an author? You were freelancing, writing, but what was the career path you thought you were on?
So I worked in public relations for a tech company, and I still do that. So I left briefly when I got my book deal and then came back to it in September, partially for, the sake of financial stability and partially because I'd been freelancing for this company and really loved them and they were hiring a role that seemed to meet with what I needed. And it was in the UK, which meant I was able to get back to the UK, which was lovely. But no, so in addition to writing books, I've also been working in PR full time as well.
Which comes in handy as an author.
Yeah.
Because nowadays you have to do a lot of your own PR for your book.
Exactly. But I've also got a brilliant team who knows what they're doing so much better than I do in terms of like book PR, because it's a whole different world. But
yes. Yeah, it is.
Yeah, it doesn't hurt to know a couple of tricks along the way for sure.
I love that. And so the next book will come out 2025, and then we expect to see you. Yeah. We need you to get a UK deal so you can see your book in a store.
I know. I need that.
Otherwise, we all need our task is to take pictures of your book in the wild in bookstores and send them to you so you can live vicariously through us.
Exactly. That's all I need.
I love that. And so, okay, we've got book number 2 coming out. Do you think you're just going to keep writing more books on the side? What's your goal?
I think so. I've got an idea for book 3, and I wrote kind of the first the prologue in the first chapter a while back and then thought, no, let me focus on book 2 for now and not get distracted by like this shiny new project. But I would love to keep writing. I have such a love-hate relationship with it. Like, it can be so challenging at certain times, but by and large, it's such a gift to be able to do this and share with people. And so I'd love to continue doing that.
What advice would you give to someone who wants to be an author, who thinks they have this in them? What would you say to them just off the cuff? Like, what would your first tip or advice be?
So I think my first piece of advice is to write for yourself first and everyone else second. I think so often people try to write what they think is going to be trendy or to emulate a certain author's voice or, whatever it might be, just to do something that's not necessarily them. And I think you have to write something that you're going to love to read, but also that you're going to love to write first and foremost, because I think that really comes through. And my other piece of advice would be to treat it like something you get to do, not something you have to do. Because I think if it starts to feel like a chore, then it's going to suck a lot of the joy out of it.
Yeah.
Whereas if you treat it as this opportunity you have to kind of put words to the page and share your thoughts and get it all down and treat that as a gift, then it feels like a gift.
I love it. That's perfect advice. I also recently read that you should write something that you will not get sick of talking about, because you'll have to talk about it for at least a year to come.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure.
So you better love your characters.
Exactly.
You are just a pleasure. I love getting to talk to you.
As are you. This has been such a delight.
I need to come to London. My husband wants to go back. He's always like, maybe we should just move there. I'm like, do it. Let's do it. Let's go. But if we visit, I'm going to totally look you up.
Oh my goodness, please do. Please do. I would love that.
Where can everyone find you and find Adelaide and then keep tabs on 2025's book number 2?
The best place to find me is probably Instagram. I'm not the best at social media in general. I'm not great at posting full stop, but I try to kind of share updates and travel pictures and all that fun stuff on Instagram at my handle is Gwheeler, GEEWHEELER. And Adelaide is available pretty much everywhere books are sold in the US.
I love it. Are you on Threads yet?
I'm not on Threads yet. I'm thinking about it, but I'm not there yet.
Got to do it. Now you're going to be like 100 million users.
I know.
It is. And there's a lot of book people on it.
This is what I hear. I've heard it's big amongst the Bookstagram community. So
there's no hashtags, so we can't find each other.
Oh no.
You have to it keeps popping up. So once you connect with some authors or agents or publishers, then all of a sudden it's in your feed. So that's how I have found my people.
All right. I'll keep that in mind. I'll look into it for sure.
Oh, well, I can't wait for book number 2. I will be reading it. You have an open invitation to come back on and talk about it.
Thank you so
and not
much.
Like 4 months after it's come out. We'll get you on before then.
Perfect.
Thank you so much, Genevieve.
Thank you.
Oh, I am so excited for book 2 to come out from Genevieve Wheeler. She's a delight. I loved throughout our interview, the light was just coming from behind her and catching the one side of her. It felt like I was there in London with her, and it was a beautiful sunny day. So that was absolutely perfect. I loved the advice that Genevieve offered for any of you who are considering becoming writers. If you have aspirations of writing a novel, a book of any sort, because I have found, and if you've been listening to my interviews with other authors, that there is no real rhyme or reason as to how one goes about with their writing. Whatever way works for you, works for you. So think about what you're writing. Is it exciting you? Does it light you up? Do you want to keep writing about it? And go from there. While you're at it, make sure you go pick up Adelaide. If you see it in a bookstore, take a picture and tag Genevieve. Tag me too, please, so I can see that you saw the book and you were listening to the show. And go watch for her second book. And if you're in London, go give her a hello. Send her a DM. She's one of the kindest people ever. And I'm so excited that she shared with herself on the show.